Nuclear War, a scenario by Annie Jacobsen. A 1 megaton thermonuclear weapon detonates over the Pentagon with a flash of light so intensely bright and hot it defies human comprehension. In a fraction of a millisecond, the air superheats to 180 million degrees Fahrenheit, far hotter than the center of the sun. The five-sided structure of the Pentagon and all 27,000 people inside are instantly vaporized, leaving nothing behind but superheated dust. A massive fireball expands at millions of miles per hour, generating a steeply fronted blast wave that mows down monuments, bridges, and human beings for miles. Within seconds, thermal radiation ignites everything flammable in the surrounding capital, stripping the skin from 1 million terrified survivors before hurricane-force winds fuel a catastrophic, unstoppable mega-inferno. Civilization in Washington, D.C. simply ceases to exist. How humanity engineered its own apocalyptic execution device is a story rooted in the Cold War. In December 1960, deep inside an underground bunker at Strategic Air Command headquarters in Nebraska, military leaders gathered to review the Single Integrated Operational Plan, or SIOP. Among the attendees was John Rubel, a sharp, observant business executive turned defense official who watched in stunned silence as generals casually laid out a preemptive nuclear strike plan against the Soviet Union and China. Using stepladders and plastic overlays, briefers demonstrated how wave after wave of nuclear bombs would obliterate Moscow, inevitably killing 600 million people. Rubel later compared this meticulous, bureaucratic planning to the Nazi Wannsee Conference, realizing he was sitting in a room of rational men calmly orchestrating a mass extermination. This sterile, underground wargaming stood in horrific contrast to the visceral reality of atomic warfare. Back in August 1945, when a rudimentary atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a brave 13-year-old girl named Setsuko Thurlow miraculously clawed her way out of a collapsed, flaming building, only to emerge into a nightmare landscape of walking corpses holding their own melting eyeballs. Nearby, Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, a dedicated physician, stumbled through the burning ruins, tripping over severed heads and bleeding from his own mangled arteries. Yet rather than stepping back from this abyss, defense scientists plunged deeper into it. Driven by the fear of a Soviet surprise attack, the American military-industrial complex industrialized bomb-making. Led by physicists like Richard Garwin, the brilliant architect who drafted the plans for the first thermonuclear hydrogen bomb, known as the Super, the arsenal swelled from a handful of atomic weapons to tens of thousands of civilization-ending warheads, all kept on hair-trigger alert under a precarious psychological doctrine known as deterrence. But deterrence is only a theory, and in this scenario, the theory fails. On a seemingly normal spring afternoon, at 4:03 a.m. local time in North Korea, a Hwasong-17 intercontinental ballistic missile, a towering, road-mobile rocket dubbed the Monster, lifts off from a dirt field. Within fractions of a second, U.S. space-based infrared satellites detect the intense thermal bloom of the rocket's exhaust. The raw data instantly streams to the Aerospace Data Facility in Colorado, setting off blaring alarms that shatter the routine of the global military apparatus. Deep beneath the Pentagon in the National Military Command Center, the Secretary of Defense, a composed, suited civilian leader, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an urgent, highly decorated military commander, are briefed on the nightmare. Algorithms quickly calculate the missile's trajectory. It is headed for the east coast of the United States. Following deeply entrenched launch-on-warning protocols, they immediately contact the White House. The President of the United States, an overwhelmed, largely uninformed figure who never fully grasped the terrifying speed of nuclear war, is pulled from the dining room by heavily armed Secret Service agents and rushed into an underground bunker. He is handed the football, the emergency satchel containing the Black Book of retaliatory strike options. The commander-in-chief is told he has a mere 6 minutes to decide whether to unleash Armageddon before the incoming missile strikes. As the North Korean ICBM arcs through space, the U.S. desperately attempts to shoot it down. Ground-based interceptor missiles launch from Alaska, but the technology is fundamentally flawed. The interceptor's exoatmospheric kill vehicles are easily fooled by simple decoys deployed alongside the real warhead, and all attempts to intercept the missile fail. Worse still, early warning systems suddenly detect a second launch. A North Korean submarine, having stealthily navigated the Pacific coastline, fires a short-range ballistic missile directly at California. Its target is the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. The warhead strikes the facility with flawless, devastating precision. The explosion not only vaporizes the plant, but triggers the ultimate devil's scenario. The facility's twin nuclear reactors and thousands of spent fuel rods shatter and melt down, spewing an uncontrollable, highly radioactive lava into the earth and lofting a toxic witch's brew of fallout into the atmosphere. A tough, elderly cattle rancher on a nearby hill miraculously survives the initial blast and films the terrifying mushroom cloud on his smartphone, uploading the footage just moments before the electromagnetic shockwaves and surging demand crash the social media servers. Back in the White House bunker, with the East Coast impact mere minutes away, the frantic president authorizes Option Charlie from the Black Book. He orders a massive retaliatory strike of 82 nuclear warheads aimed at decapitating North Korea's leadership and military infrastructure. In the plains of Wyoming, 50 Minuteman III ICBMs blast out of their subterranean silos, charting a ballistic path toward Pyongyang. However, the geography of the Earth dictates that to hit North Korea, American ICBMs must fly directly over Russia. In Moscow, the situation violently spirals out of control. Russia's early warning Tundra satellite system is notoriously unreliable, frequently confusing high-altitude clouds or sunlight with missile plumes. Furthermore, the satellites cannot distinguish between 50 incoming American missiles and a full-scale preemptive attack. As alarms scream inside Russia's National Defense Management Center, generals quickly contact the Russian president. Isolated in a freezing subterranean bunker in Siberia, the paranoid Russian leader is informed that hundreds of American warheads are bearing down on the motherland. Convinced that the United States has orchestrated a treacherous decapitation strike under the guise of the North Korean crisis, and furious that the American president has not contacted him, the Russian leader opens the Cheget, the Russian equivalent of the football. Refusing to wait and absorb a nuclear blow, he authorizes a full-scale launch. Across the vast Russian landscape, over 1,000 intercontinental ballistic missiles erupt from silos and mobile launchers, all aimed at the United States. Before the American or Russian missiles can even reach their targets, the North Korean regime plays its final, devastating card. A seemingly innocuous North Korean satellite orbiting high above the United States suddenly detonates. It is a super EMP weapon. Exploding 300 miles above Nebraska, it unleashes a colossal electromagnetic pulse that blankets the entire contiguous United States. The pulse instantly destroys the nation's power grids and permanently fries the SCADA systems, the computerized architecture that controls America's critical infrastructure. In the blink of an eye, the modern era ends. Commercial airliners lose their fly-by-wire controls and plunge from the sky. Commuter trains collide at top speed. Gas pipelines rupture and water treatment plants fail. Marine One, the heavily armored helicopter carrying the evacuated U.S. president away from Washington, suffers catastrophic electrical failure and drops like a stone into the Maryland woods. Though a Secret Service agent manages to tandem jump the president from the falling chopper, the commander-in-chief is left critically injured, bleeding out alone on the dark, damp forest floor, entirely cut off from his military. Meanwhile, the Secretary of Defense, flying in a mechanical V-22 Osprey toward the Raven Rock mountain bunker known as Site R, is permanently blinded by the thermonuclear flash of the Washington, D.C. detonation. Guided by aides into the subterranean fortress, the sightless civilian is hastily sworn in as acting president. But the chain of command is in ruins. The Stratcom commander, circling above the Midwest in an analog, EMP-resistant doomsday plane, realizes the nation is about to be annihilated by the incoming Russian barrage. Relying on universal unlock codes, he orders the launch of every remaining nuclear weapon in the American arsenal. The Russian missiles finally arrive, striking the United States in a relentless 20-minute hail of hellfire. Stratcom headquarters in Nebraska is vaporized. The Raven Rock mountain complex is pulverized, killing the newly sworn-in acting president. From Minot to Barksdale, every major military installation is erased. Simultaneously, Russian submarine-launched missiles decimate NATO airbases across Europe, vaporizing pilots who were desperately scrambling their jets for one-way suicide missions. In retaliation, submerged American Trident submarines utilize ancient celestial star-sighting navigation to launch their payloads, erasing Pyongyang, Moscow, and hundreds of other targets. In less than 2 hours, billions of people are incinerated, crushed, or suffocated in firestorms that consume thousands of cities worldwide. But the dying has only just begun. The uncontrollable mega-fires loft 150 million tons of black, toxic soot high into the stratosphere, entirely blotting out the sun. Nuclear winter descends upon the Earth. Global temperatures plummet by 40 degrees, transforming summer into a perpetual freezing night. The sudden absence of sunlight collapses the foundational food chain. Across the Northern Hemisphere, agriculture fails instantly. Billions of survivors who manage to outlast the blast waves and radiation sickness slowly, agonizingly starve to death. When the soot finally begins to settle months later, a new horror emerges. The nuclear fireballs have shredded the Earth's protective ozone layer. The returning sun now bathes the planet in lethal ultraviolet radiation, forcing the starving remnants of humanity into dark, damp underground caves. In this ruined world, radiation-resistant insects breed uncontrollably, swarming the thawing, rotting corpses that litter the surface and unleashing rampant plagues upon the few humans left alive. Mankind is violently thrust back into the Stone Age, reduced to a primitive, savage existence. Fast forward 24,000 years. The lethal radiation has finally decayed, and the Earth has slowly rejuvenated her forests and oceans. If any descendants of humanity survive, they will likely have no memory of the towering skyscrapers, digital networks, or nations that once defined the 21st century. They might stumble upon the buried, unexplainable ruins of our society, in much the same way that modern archaeologists Klaus Schmidt and Michael Morsch discovered Göbekli Tepe, a massive 12,000-year-old sanctuary in Turkey built by advanced hunter-gatherers who mysteriously vanished, leaving behind only silent stones. Future beings will dig through the irradiated strata of our era and wonder what cataclysm erased us so thoroughly from the cosmos. They will never know the names of the countries that fought, the politicians who gave the orders, or the ideologies that fueled the fire. All that will be proven is the stark, tragic realization that the enemy was never a specific nation or regime. The enemy was the nuclear weapons themselves.